Welcome to part 2 of the test positions on pin. We start with the first one in that segment, that is number 7. This is from the game between Boros and Seller played in the year 1995, and it's a nice way to bring about a pin. It in fact is forcing. So here what we see, white playing D captures E5 and it's a double attack, a fork of the pawn. So this forces queen into e5, otherwise the queen would be captured by the pawn. And now comes the pin with bishop f4. So I hope you have understood this simple way to create a pin. Number 8 in this test position, again it's white to play. It's from the game between Lipnitsky and Sidorov, and what do we see here? That there is a pin on the pawn on g6, and we have learned that a chessman which is absolutely pinned cannot move away from that line, so cannot move, and in fact is like protecting the knight on h5, but it's superfluous. White simply went ahead with queen captures h5. It is illegal for black to capture with his pawn and bring in his king in check, so there followed king g1 with mate on h8. The next position is a famous position from the game by David Bronstein against an unknown player in a simultaneous display at Sochi in the year 1959. And Bronstein had sacrificed a piece to reach this position. And here what we see, that black had put up his queen on e4 and hoping for exchange of queens. He is one piece up, and this is like the right thing to do. But then, to his surprise, he lost the queen to the wonderful move rook d8. And what do we see with this move? This forces king into d8, and now the able defender, the knight on f6, which was defending the queen on e4, is under absolute pin. Now it allowed white to simply win the queen. Queen captures e4. So need to be very careful that when can a strong pinning come. Number 10 is from the game between Shumov and Vinever, two famous masters played at St. Petersburg of 1875. And what do we see? That black king is in the open with rook on b7 having taken a commanding post on the 7th rank. And here now, though black is a piece up having an extra bishop and is looking for exchange of queen, white had played queen a4, to which black had replied queen c6, blocked the check. But now, to the surprise of black, there came the move rook c1, putting a pressure on the pin piece. It's an absolute pin here. And here in this position, black replied instantly, resigned instantly, because queen into a4 allows rook into c8, check and mate. And of course, if he doesn't capture, he will lose the queen. There is only one reasonable try for black in this position, and I would like to show that. And that is by moving pawn to d4 and giving support to the queen. We know that queen is being is going to be lost. But if black can get enough compensation for the queen, then it is fighting. And now what we can see, that if white gets too hasty in getting the queen, then there follows bishop into c6, and what do we see? A double attack. The queen is under attack, and as also the rook on b7. And after say queen captures a7, we have bishop captures b7, queen into b7. And this should be some sort of fighting, because black has two rooks and this pawn. So okay, though white still has better chances, but why to allow such counter? So when d4 is played, instead of capturing the queen, there is a nice idea. White can continue the same position by improving the position of queen from a4 to b5. That means what we see, the pin continues And now you know, like when bishop into c6 comes after white captures the queen on c6, the queen can move away with check. Not only that, now you know, in fact, he has created a threat of without mating black without winning the queen. So he can like try for queen e5 check followed by queen e7 check and mate. So here now this you know like is game over for black, and that is what you should do. Like should not be hasty when you are winning material or when you are having advantageous position. Find out the best continuation, the simplest one, and which like should not afford any sort of counterplay for your opponent. And this position from the game between Bruntrup and Budrich played at Berlin in 1954 is one of my personal favorite. And we see here examples of pins and cross pins, though material on the board is few. So here white starts with a simple looking bc5, pinning the queen on d6, and it appears, oh, this is you know like what we say, a pin in the rudimentary form. But then black has a defense. He moves his bishop to b6 and creates a cross pin, a counter pin on the bishop on c5. It means that it is not possible, and see that pin is also absolute, means in fact both the pins were absolute. When white first played bishop to c5, that was also an absolute pin, and now when black replied with bishop to b6 pinning the white bishop on c5, it's also an absolute pin. That means the pinned piece cannot get away. White is not in a position to capture the queen on d6. At the most, you know, like here he can think of playing bishop into b6, then when here black can bring in equality with queen into b6. So this was not working. So like, was the move, first move of white, the candidate move bishop c5, was it incorrect? No, it is correct. What we learn is that when chessmen are pinned, the idea is to put more pressure on them. So here, since the queen on d6 is pinned, white brought about the second pressure with queen f4, and now what do we see? It's a double attack. A check to the king, an attack on the queen on d6, and after king gets out of check, say king to e7, white will win the queen with a check, and at the same time he protects the bishop. And not only that, there is a double attack. So after king gets out of check, there is further loss of material for black, and therefore he resigned. The concluding example in part 2 of our journey on pin, it's a famous game by Kasparov as black against Baryev. It was played at Imopar, Paris in the year 1991, and what we see is Kasparov is exchanged down, but he has his piece is in excellent position. So like you can see this bishop on e6 striking at h3, bishop on d4 pinning the pawn on f2, rook on b3 in good position, queen on d5 in good position, and here the winning move came in the form of rook g3, which led to the instant resignation of Baryev. For black is now threatening mate in 1 with queen into g2, and we see that it is not possible for white to play f captures g3 because it is the pawn on f2 is pinned by the bishop on d4. And like here Baryev resigned instantly, but we can also examine, like if it tries the defense bishop f3 to protect the pawn on g2, but then you can also see the pin here now. That means the pawn on g2 is pinned by the rook on g3. So Kasparov will simply go ahead with queen into f3, renewing the threat of mate on g2. The concluding example in part 2 of the pin is from the game between Baryev and Kasparov played at Imopar, Paris in the year 1991. Kasparov is exchanged down in this position, but is able to bring about a win with a simple pin. In this position, he played here rook g3, And what do we see? That the pawn on f2 cannot capture the rook on g3 as it's pinned by the bishop on d4. And now we see black threatening queen into g2, check and mate. Of course, Bariv resigned here instantly, but let us also examine like what if he can try bishop f3. Well, in that case, you can see that though bishop on f3 is protecting the pawn on g2, we see that g2 in fact is not protecting it because there is a pin from the rook on g3. Black can easily play queen captures f3 and renews the checkmating threat. And this is how, like the win came for Kasparov. I hope you have understood this part 2 of the pin, and then the next part will conclude this chapter, the test positions on pin, with part 3. But bye for now.